This one dealing with his commentary on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Book 8, related to friendship and ethics. After discussing continence and incontinence in Book 7 of the Nicomachean Ethics, in Book 8, Aristotle presents 6 arguments why ethics and political science must study friendship, because first, he says, moral philosophy studies virtue. Reductively, friendship is a kind of justice or accompanies virtue as an effect of justice. It is reduced, in a sense, to that same species. Moral philosophy considers, secondly, all things needed for human beings, for human living. Friends are so necessary an external good for human life, Aristotle says, that no sane human being would claim to live without them. Even the wealthy, rulers, powerful people need friends to help acquire, preserve, and protect external goods. The poor, the young, people in their prime of life need friends as a refuge, a restraint against sin, vice, and to help to do good acts. The moral philosopher needs to study what is naturally good by nature, he says in his third argument. By nature, we feel a friendship for others. For example, parents for children, adult birds for their young. People of the same race have common customs and social life. Who have these feel friendship. By nature, human beings experience a natural friendship even for strangers. In a fourth argument, he says that ethics appears ordered toward the good of the state, and friendship appears necessary for the preservation of states, the prevention of their dissolution. Hence, rulers inclined to prefer friendship and equity to justice to preserve the harmony and concord of the states, because discord threatens the security of a state. Argument 5, he says that perfect friendship, perfect friendship exists, when it exists, no need exists for justice. But if men are just, they still need friendship. If men are not perfect friends, perfect justice helps them preserve and strengthen friendship. Hence, for a political scientist, studying friendship is more crucial than studying justice. Sixth and finally, in these introductory arguments, he says friendship is not only a necessary good as a means, it's an honorable, lovable good as such. In reply to the objection that people like people who are like them because likes like, but they do not like people who are competitors, Aristotle says that absolutely considered, friendship is rooted in a natural love that people have for other people. Incidentally, people in the same business profession dislike one another because a business competitor deprives another business person of a good. Some of the ancients tried to give cosmological arguments to explain why friendship exists. For example, Euripides, Heraclitus, and Empedocles, Aristotle cites. But he rejects considering such cosmological explanations in a work on ethics and politics in favor of principles of human nature and choice. He also rejects an error of some philosophers who claim that because friendships are compared to more or less only one species of friendship exists, he does so because specific difference is based on the unequal having of a common genus. These differences of more or less are specific differences of a common genus, which we went over on our course on the one and the many, and as Aristotle appears to indicate here, this understanding was not widely known in his time, that he was developing this notion of the relation of genus and species. Having finished his introduction regarding the need for ethics to study friendship, next, Aristotle considers good as the object of friendship. First, he does this by investigating the nature and definition of friendship in relationship to its object. To simplify his investigation, he considers the object of love, from which love and friendship get their name. Then he notes that not everything is love's formal object, considered as such, and is not loved, considered as such. Evil is not loved, is unlovable. Only the good considered absolutely, the intrinsically perfect and pleasurable whole, in itself as an end, the pleasurable good as an end, the perfect good. Only this, or the relatively relationally good as a means, is lovable. The relational good as a means is good precisely as an enabling means to this intrinsically perfect good. Conceptually considered, he says that considered they are distinguished as intrinsically perfect and desirable good, and intrinsically perfect and desirable as possessed, pleasurable, in which an appetite rests. That is, the intrinsically perfect good is intrinsically pleasurable because Aristotle is considering it as a principle of movement. Next, to expose an untruth so as to incline a student more readily to accept the truth, Aristotle poses a problem. When loving, do we love the absolute good or the good relative to us? Because sometimes these are not identical. For example, while to philosophize is good absolutely considered in itself, it's not good for a pauper. While the sweet is pleasant absolutely considered, it's not so to someone with a sour taste in his or her mouth. Aristotle says further that facultatively considered by nature, every faculty tends toward, takes delight in, loves what is proportionate to itself according to its intensive quantum strength, a mean relative to it. Absolutely considered, from the standpoint of the faculty as faculty, we pursue the facultative good within species limits. Relatively considered, proportionate to our individual facultative ability, we pursue the good relative to us as our personal mean. Arguing against the conclusion he just drew, Aristotle claims that every man loves what appears good to him. We love what we're able to see, but not what is necessarily really good. Hence, to say what is lovable for us is good for us, in a way, is false. To this criticism, Aristotle replies in a threefold way. When we love what we love as something really good for us, even if it is not really so. Three possible objects of human love exist. The good considered absolutely as perfective, the good as an enabling means to become perfective, which it can be either the useful or the imperfectly present, making these the three possible goods. Friendship cannot consist in loving inanimate things. It consists in loving human beings, because inanimate things cannot return love. We cannot will good to inanimate things. We cannot love them with benevolence in the same way as we do human beings. Even if we love wine, Aristotle says, to be preserved, we do so chiefly for self-love, not for friendship with the wine. He adds that when we love another chiefly for the good of another, without desire for return good, we love out of benevolence, not out of friendship. Friendship is So friendship between equals is a kind of exchange of love, of mutual benefit, generated by a sense of commutative justice. The complete concept definition of friendship must add that it's a mutually recognized desired benevolence and love. Mutually desired benevolent good, recognized as such by both parties for a perfective, useful, or pleasurable good. Note that for Aristotle, absolutely considered, the good as good is the intrinsically perfect whole, the intrinsically desirable and pleasing, as considered in itself as the formal object of a faculty. It's a perfect whole operating as a facultative principle of act, just as absolutely considered the one properly understood is a principle of measure. It has to be understood as a generating principle. It generates measure, limit. The good generates pleasure, is a pleasure-generating principle, chiefly and properly understood, and so is indistinguishable from that which is perfecting facultative operation. Next, getting on to St. Thomas's Lesson 3, Aristotle divides friendship into 3 species: perfective, useful, and pleasurable, based upon there being unequally perfect ways of having friendship, qualitatively different of friendship, incompletely possessing in one way or another the definition of friendship. Chiefly, primarily, perfect friendship is friendship of mutual goodwill. It's perfective friendship. Imperfect friendships are friendships of enabling means, utility, imperfect pleasure. This is the form of pleasure that most people identify with pleasure in its chief sense. In these forms of friendship, a person does not act chiefly out of love for another, to give love, but chiefly acts to receive a good from another. Aristotle adds that such friendships are easily dissolved, based upon something incidental to a person's nature as a person, and to his or her perfection. Such friendships tend to belong to the following groups as such: to the young, the old, the sick, the needy, the rich, the poor, fellow travelers, the incontinent, and to business professionals. In fact, this whole analysis of moral psychology that Aristotle is going through in books 8 and 9 of the Nicomachean Ethics are incredibly crucial for people in professional activities in business, as well as in politics, to understand. The fact that they're not understood and studied is an absolute devastating problem for Western culture today, especially. Perfect friendship tends to last because it exists between virtuous people, people perfectly good, prudent people who wish good to others, to perfect them and be perfected by them in increasing ways, continuously. It contains all of the elements needed for friendship. It's useful, really pleasant, and of real mutual benefit, but it's rare and takes a long time to develop, Aristotle tells us. Following his normal method of defining his subject as a whole, then comparing and contrasting parts. Having defined friendship, Aristotle next compares imperfect friendships, showing how they are alike. Contrast them, showing how they differ. This begins St. Thomas's Lesson 4. To start doing this, he examines both in relation to the reason for the chief aim for loving found in perfect friendship. In perfect friendship, he notes that these tend to last, chiefly because their chief reason for loving is reciprocal good. They are based upon possessing specifically like habits. If either one of these two elements is missing, he claims that friendships tend not to last. Since friendship based on utility or imperfect pleasure have these two elements, they tend to last for a while. Because friendships depend upon reciprocity and pleasures widely vary, friendships based on pleasure like sex have a difficult time enduring. Also, people who return a useful good for a pleasure or a pleasure for a useful good have a difficult time being friends if their chief aims for being friends differs. Only virtuous people form perfect friendships, and they can only do so with each other for the sake of pleasure. Any of these forms of friendship, the virtuous, the pleasurable, the useful, people involved in these can be friends if they are not evil. Evil men can only form friendships to use people for personal pleasure and gain. They cannot reciprocate good. At best, they form the semblance of real friendship. To be perfect friends, friends must be perfectly friend-worthy, just, which means being honest, trustworthy, prudent. Hence, virtuous friends incline not to believe evil of a friend. When somebody tells them this, they don't tend to believe it. When it does, in fact, happen, such friendships can quickly dissolve. In other kinds of friendship, imperfect ones, especially those based on pleasure, believing a friend to be unjust, to act unjustly or morally evilly, is less of a problem or no problem at all. Professional dishonesty, however, Aristotle notes, in business is a problem. It will tend to destroy the business. Having contrasted imperfect acts of friendship, Aristotle next examines the nature of perfect friendship in general. To do so, he makes a distinction between two ways in which we properly name natures, according to power or potentiality and act. For example, we call people virtuous because they possess the habit of virtue, or because they possess the act of virtue. They're doing virtuous acts. Analogously, he says, most properly, we call people friends who actually live together harmoniously, pleasantly, and enjoy delight in doing good for each other. In a way, we call people friends those who have the habit to act in this way, but that's secondarily. Because maintaining regular mutual activity tends to be needed to cause friendships to last, he explains how three classes of people have a hard time being lasting friends. First, those geographically separated from each other for a long time because since causes preserve their effects and friendship is the act of a habit, prolonged absence of friends tends first to cause forgetfulness of friendship, then weakness of, and finally disappearance of it. To be strongly possessed, habits demand exercise. Since inclination toward being pleasant, sociable, is a necessary condition of becoming friendly, people lacking these dispositions do not tend to form friendship. For example, the gloomy, the morose, the mean-spirited, people not pleasant to be around, people racked by pain, the elderly, and the shy. I added the shy. I don't think Aristotle includes it there. Third class of people who do not incline to have friendships are benevolent people who do not or cannot live together. Living together, bestowing favors on each other, rejoicing in the same things, getting the best out of each other, appear to be essential acts of perfect friendship. Friendship is chiefly a habit of goodwill, an important point to note, not an emotion. The love that the sensitive appetite experiences, just like the pleasure it experiences, is not sound. It tends not to last. It's not love in the properly human sense. Acts of friendship chiefly involve three, according to Aristotle: living together, repeatedly doing favors for each other, and sharing the same pleasures, reposing in the same sort of appetites in the identical good. Having considered the nature of friendship in general and different species of friendship, Aristotle next considers friendship in relationship to its subject, whatever makes a person friend-worthy. He continues, in doing this, he continues to examine the imperfect friendship in relationship to the perfect. chiefly regarding the qualities that make a person friend-worthy, capable of generating friendship, entering into friendships. He says that such qualities chiefly consist in sociability, liking people, being able to be agreeable, get along with others, enter into conversation. For him, friendship is chiefly a communications activity between people, an activity of pleasing communication. Hence, people who delight in talking readily agree with others, find pleasure in the company of other people. Like young people, quickly make friends. Old people, the morose, quarrelsome, people easily critical of others, can be benevolent but have a difficult time making friends and maintaining friendships because they do not tend to live with or take pleasure in the company of many people. By its nature, for three reasons, Aristotle says, friendship does not lend itself to one person having many friends, especially among virtuous people who tend always to be few in number. The superabundant, excessive love that perfect friendship demands is designed by nature for one, not many people. Most people can't perform it. It's designed for a best friend. As an example, he gives the attempt of one man excessively to love many women. In perfect friendship, friends are exceedingly pleasing to each other because being displeasing to others is possible in so many ways. Perfect friendship is hard to form and sustain. To be perfect, friends have to form habitual association, have to do so with many. Doing so with many people is difficult. For two reasons. In imperfect friendship, one man can have many friends because Aristotle says we can have many pleasing and useful friends. Forming such friendships takes little time or effort in most cases. This is more difficult when the chief aim of the friendships between these people differs. For example, when one person wants utility and another except as happens in the case of youth, where even in the case of utility, pleasure is chiefly wanted. This conflict in pleasures is a very important point to note, which I'll get back to, especially in political and business dealings. In pleasurable friendships, friends tend to love each other more generously than in useful relationships, which tend to be more common in business activities. Hence, friendships based on pleasure more perfectly resemble perfect friendship. Because they are rich and tend to have no need of useful people, according to Aristotle, rich people incline to form friendships based on pleasure. But here Aristotle is talking about the super rich, not those who are constantly pursuing wealth for the sake of maintaining major corporations and organizations, for example. We human beings can bear unpleasantness for a short time, he says, but we cannot bear it for long. We could not even stand the good if it did not please. Hence, men who do not find pleasure in acts of virtue cannot persevere in them. Hence, pleasurable friendship is more necessary to a greater number of people and to people who are more generous. Next, Aristotle says that men in positions of power tend to form friendships based on pleasure and utility, not on virtue. This especially applies to politicians and people in business. For utility, they especially like men who are shrewd and funny, qualities not generally found in one person, often found, however, in excellent salespeople. In reply to he doesn't say that, I add that. In reply to a possible objection that because the virtuous are pleasant and useful, the powerful can be friends of the virtuous, Aristotle replies that the virtuous do not incline to befriend powerful people as powerful, but for their virtue. And powerful people do not incline to befriend virtuous people as virtuous, but to use them, and only insofar as they defer to the powerful as more powerful. The virtuous person is not inclined to defer to the powerful as more virtuous, or more powerful. And the powerful man is not inclined to defer to the virtuous except as useful. Brilliant, once again. That's like moral analysis and moral psychology. Usually men who excel in power and riches do not excel in virtue. They defer, they absolutely have to possess it, but what he means that they don't tend to reach maximum levels. They tend to defer to morally virtuous, and they do not tend to defer to the morally virtuous as their qualitative betters. Finally, Aristotle notes that in all three species, friendships are based upon proportionate equality and ability to love and be loved in relationship to a chief end. Only perfect friendship is properly named. The other forms of friendship are said analogously as they more or less resemble the perfect. He also notes that people in business who excel at it don't tend to think that people who are really powerful don't tend to think that anybody is better than they are. So they're not going to defer to anybody. After discussing the three kinds of friendship, based upon equal relations between friends, Aristotle next talks about friendship essentially involving unequal relation between the friends. He is thinking chiefly here about family friendships and civic friendships rooted in a qualitative inequality in friendworthiness. In this form of friendship, a qualitative and intensive quantum difference, as I would put it, exists between the friends that causes them to be able to engage in commutative exchanges in goods. They cannot give and return goods equal in quality and species, however. Since the normal disposition of friendship is to be disposed to do favors of equal proportion, this form of friendship is unique because it involves friends who cannot equally reciprocate favors. Examples of such friendships are parents to children, children to parents, superiors, qualitatively superior in power. The one simply doesn't possess the kind of power as another. A husband and a wife, executives, you might say, to lower-level employees. Different reasons for loving and abilities to love cause different kinds of friendships and are at play here. Aristotle says these friendships are preserved by each party contributing what is suitable, fitting, proportionate, proper to the relationship according to the unequal status and ability of the parties. The inequality involved in these relationships more closely resembles that of a contributive and distributive justice than that of commutative justice, although that is part of it. While equality is the goal of justice, Aristotle claims it's the starting point of friendship. Friendship starts with knowing the kind of equality that the relationship requires. That is, notice, it's based on self-knowledge. It must originate in the estimative sense. You have to know your powers and abilities, and the proportionate equality you share in relationship to others, what your powers are. This is crucial to know, especially in business, because friendship cannot exist between people widely differing as equals related to a common end, where they have to engage in as parts of a whole, in partnerships. Great differences in equality cause friendships to be impossible to form or not to last. For example, between the gods and humans, kings and peasants, the best and wisest, and the evil and fools. An exact determination of the greatness in inequality that will prevent friendship formation or destroy a friendship is impossible to determine, according to Aristotle. The best we can say is that inequalities too great make friendships impossible to form and to last. From the prior discussion, it appears to follow, Aristotle says, that we cannot wish the greatest of goods for some friends, because then they could no longer be our friends. He solves this problem by saying that when we wish others good, we do so of them as human beings, not as gods. When we wish another a good, we wish good to ourselves most of all, including not to lose a friend. Having finished examining friendship between unequals, Aristotle next considers how loving and being loved relate to friendship. And we're now up to lesson 8 in St. Thomas. He shows how in 3 ways loving and not being loved is more of the nature of friendship. The many appear to want to be loved, not to love, because they associate being loved with being of greater good, qualitatively better, honorable. For this reason, the many tend to take pleasure in flattery. They love people fawning over them. Flatterers, according to Aristotle, however, are counterfeit friends. They tend to be of low moral character. They pretend to be a friend by loving more than wanting to be loved. Because of an inordinate love of honor, we human beings wish to be loved rather than to love. Yet, according to Aristotle, people who seek to be honored do so chiefly for being good, because honor is a sign of intrinsic goodness. Hence, we desire honor chiefly from good people, only incidentally to verify to ourselves our goodness, our virtue. Some of us chiefly seek honor from the powerful, hoping to attain something from those that we honor. And also we seek it from the just to confirm our good self-opinion, our high self-opinion. In and of itself, having friends appears to be a sign of honor, according to Aristotle, because it indicates possession of some personal good. Since the essential is more excellent than the incidental or accidental, loving is more excellent than being loved then. In several ways, Aristotle shows how the excellence of friendship consists in loving and being loved. Friendship, he claims, is a habit. A habit terminates an operation. That's where it reaches its perfection, not in being acted upon. For example, mothers who are good mothers take more pleasure in loving their children than in being loved by them. This appears natural to us. Friendship is maintained by loving according to excellence and ability, proportionately. Friendship is as lasting as the proportion love is able to achieve. Friends tend to be praised for loving, not for being loved, and for doing so according to their ability. This is not only true in Aristotle's time, thousands of years ago, but also today, universally, everywhere, indicating the universality of human nature. He doesn't say that, once again I do, although he would agree, as would St. Thomas. The likeness that preserves friendship is found maximally in the virtuous person. People who want to love more than be loved so as to get the best out of their friends. Notice that this distinction of friendship regarding perfective, useful, and pleasurable is actually a distinction of species within a genus, of contrary opposites constituting a genus that is determined by the ability to receive and hold on to the nature of the genus. The friendship of the evil man, according to Aristotle, is the least stable and enduring because it is intrinsically hateful, self-serving, in a negative way. The evil man finds nothing really good, pleasant, that mutually satisfies him with another evil man. And evil men can remain friends only for a short time. Friendships for pleasure and utility last longer than those of the wicked, so long as pleasure and utility last. So this is even less than these friendships, the friendships of evil men. Friendships between people of opposite social and economic conditions appear to be based chiefly on utility, based on need. Such opposites can also exist in friendships rooted in pleasures, but do not tend to exist among the virtuous because no disparity of condition exists among them. Sometimes disparity in these conditions, Aristotle adds, can cause ridicule to a person who thinks more of himself than he actually deserves, and I guess publicly displays it. Having considered friendship among unequals, next Aristotle considers friendships in relationship to different human associations, saying that every association is a kind of communications relation, and that friendship, justice tend to hold together such associations. Aristotle adds that we diversify friendships chiefly based upon their diversity of aims for associating, communicating with each other. Were no communications to exist, no communications between substances, as Descartes might say, no friendships would exist, which indicates why Cartesian thought basically wound up destroying friendships in modernity, my addition. Were no communications to exist, no friendships would exist, which indicates that friendships weaken as the quality of communication between and among friends weakens. Aristotle adds that justice and injustice increase as they involve closer friends. To steal from a brother or a friend is morally worse than that to steal from a stranger. It's like taking money off a bar. Once again, my addition. By nature, all human associations are enabling means. They aim at something useful, needy for living. For utility's sake, human beings appear to incline to associate, to remain together for common interest. Even those based on pleasure do so. All private associations by nature aim to generate civic association to benefit us all during life, to generate a state, a political order, and to order it for right living, organize it for right living. Getting to lesson 10 in St. Thomas, having shown that by nature all forms of friendship aim at generating civic friendship. Next, Aristotle starts to discuss different species of friendship in relationship to different species of states. As is well known, Aristotle divides political societies chiefly on the basis of the number of people who rule, the one, the few, or the many, and the way they rule, justly or unjustly. Just rule of one he calls a kingship, of a few he calls an aristocracy, or that based on virtue. And those of the many, that is just, he calls a democracy, which seeks honorable goods, either rewards or on the basis of some sort of contribution to the common good. In a democracy, he says, mediocre people rule, and they intend the good of the rich and the poor. In the unjust rule, he says, the rule of one is a tyranny of the few, an oligarchy, not ruling for virtue, but mainly to achieve money. It degenerates into a plutocracy. And then rule of the many. The oligarchy, the democracy and the democracy, he says, resemble each other because they involve rule of the masses, but democracy only intends the good of the poor. Next, Aristotle shows how family and household relations resemble political orders. Benevolent paternalism of father over sons resembles kingship. Malevolent paternalism resembles a master-slave relation, the way Persian fathers treat their sons like slaves. This is an unfitting relation between father and children, according to Aristotle, but to use slaves for household profit is okay, appears right to him. Lest we delight in our moral superiority over Aristotle, he uses the term slavery in a very wide sense, including people who are incarcerated as prisoners, people who are natural slaves to the extent that they can't take care of themselves, they have medical problems, and also people who work for a living, or employees. He considers that a kind of slavery. So it's you have to be very careful when you seek to be critical of the ancients and their understanding of slavery. Aristotle says, and not glory in your kind of self-righteousness. Aristotle says the way, or our self-righteousness, Aristotle says the way husband and wife rule a household is aristocratic. Each has dominion over what pertains to each, what they can do with their excellence. Husbands, he says, should not arrange everything, should not leave the wife in charge of nothing. Wives, who are heiresses, should not arrange everything, leave their husbands in charge of nothing, rule based on riches and their power. Each should rule according to his or her excellence, like aristocrats, virtuously, not like oligarchs. Aristotle adds that rule by brothers close in age resembles timocracy. A democracy resembles a group of people staying together at an inn with no one in charge of anything, including expenses. If anyone has authority, it's weak. No one is responsible for anything, including paying the bills. After distinguishing different kinds of political household associations, in St. Thomas's Lesson 11, Aristotle next shows how organization of states resembles that of friendships. Once continuing what he's already been talking about. This is so because every political order is a species of justice involving a kind of friendship. He compares rule of a king to benevolent paternalism, friendship between unequals. He says that while the benefaction of asking is greater than that of a father, because it extends to more people, that is, the benefaction of a king is greater. The benefaction of a father to one person is greater because the father is the cause of a son's three greatest goods: life, upbringing, and education. Just as a king is the ruler of his subject, Aristotle maintains that the father is the ruler of his son, ancestor of his descendants. All such relationships have a common principle: excellence of one person over others. Equality of proportionality regarding gifts and honors is in play in this kind of relationship. Friendship between husband and wife resembles that between aristocrats, not of a slave. A wife, for example, being a slave to a husband, as people might mistakenly attribute to Aristotle. Timocracy, he says, is like fraternal friendship. The following friendships correspond to corrupt forms of government. Since little justice exists in them, so does little friendship. Least friendship is in a tyranny, in a tyranny where a tyrant treats citizens like tools and slaves. No real friendship can exist toward tools. A master has no real friendship with a slave as a slave, but Aristotle says he can have such a real relationship as a friend with a slave as a human being. Most friendships exist in a democracy which tries to make the untalented man equal to the talented by unfairly rewarding him in distributive goods. He doesn't say that once again, but that's in agreement with his principles. Oligarchy is a type of relation existing between tyranny and democracy. Having distinguished personal, domestic, civil friendships as forms of common participation toward an end, Aristotle next defines friendship on the basis of sharing something in common into blood relatives, non-blood relatives, close associates through common upbringing, close friends, villagers, city, state, nation, and fellow travelers. These are personal and domestic relations, and also civic relations. Parental relationship is the mutual foundation of all subsequent friendship because by nature parents inclined to love their children as part of themselves. Love between parent and child is closest to that of natural self-love, from which Aristotle says all friendship derives. For three reasons, he says, by nature parents inclined to love their children more than their children love them. The more a person knows the cause of love, the more he loves. Parents know their children as part of themselves, know causes of their generation. They know children longer than children know them. Children know their parents as authors of their existence. The relationship of blood relatives is always of procreator to offspring, even of like grandparents, remote generators. While such parts are separated, like a a whole to a separable part, while such parts are separated from the natural whole, they retain a natural closeness for it, because the whole includes them, but they do not include it. Parents know and love their children for a longer length of time from birth than children know and love their parents. It takes time for children to know even who their parents are. By nature, mothers love their children more than fathers do, he says, because mothers know better than their fathers who their children are, who fathered them. In regard to time, mothers conceive affection of love for their children longer. They know them longer than do the fathers. Brothers love each other as begotten by the same parents. This would be the same with sisters, although Aristotle doesn't talk about sisters or sisterly relationships in this Nicomachean Ethics. They have a natural closeness, are reared, educated together. They live close together like friends from birth. Other blood relatives share common ancestors, are more or less related, giving them a natural domestic proximity, making them in some way all part of a family. In relation to temporal proximity to common ancestor, because parents are the greatest of benefactors to their children, children have a friendship to parents as to a superior good. In proportion as they live together in common, children and parents share more of a pleasure and utility than they share with other friends. Aristotle adds that friendship among brothers is like friends living together, but naturally stronger for reasons already given, and the same is analogously true for other blood relations. Regarding friendship between a man and a wife, by recourse to a higher principle, Aristotle says, man is a political animal, but more conjugal than political, because conjugal relation between a man and a woman is the first principle of all other human associations. Because this conjugal union is generic, part of animal nature, the natural inclination to preserve it is stronger than the inclination to preserve any civic association, something which should be remembered today as people attempt to change their understanding of the Western notion of marriage, based upon Aristotle's natural understanding of human relations that we're going over here. While union between a male and a female among other animals exists exclusively for species preservation, generation of offspring among humans, conjugal friendship supplies a need for sufficiency for a family, and preservation of familial friendship. It generates the stronger domestic relationship that serves as the proximate principle of civic association, through which only men can get out of women goods that other women cannot get out of them, and vice versa, thereby generating higher forms of social life. Moreover, the conjugal relation between men and women creates an essential means, necessary condition for generating and maintaining transgenerational civic good that helps to maintain and strengthen a state long term. It provides a necessary, he adds that conjugal friendship provides a natural connection with common ancestors, commonly known ancestors, that strengthens the political union and is based on pleasure, utility, and virtue. Regarding children, Aristotle says, they appear to strengthen conjugal union, a sign of which is that sterile couples tend to separate more often than married ones. Couples whose conjugal union essentially includes the well-being of their children, which causes them to tend to last longer. He concludes this discussion by answering a question about how a man and a wife ought to behave toward each other in marriage, by saying, in such a way as each other fulfills what is just for each other. After examining different kinds of friendship, Aristotle says he discusses complaints, quarrels that arise in friendships. Quarrels based on merit and equality, or inequality. He says they can arise in any of the three kinds of friendship. They happen most in friendships based on utility, but do not happen in friendships based on virtue. They happen most in utilitarian friendships because business relations, those in which people want to use each other for personal advantage, always want more than they get and think they receive less than it is their due. They complain about not getting as much as they need, especially when they have done so much, while the benefactors in such relationships say they have not enough, that they have not enough to give. They do not happen in virtuous friendships because in such friendships people incline to give more than they get. Quarrels happen rarely in friendships based chiefly on pleasure, because if friends in these relations enjoy each other's company, each has what he wants. If he does not staying in such a relationship is always possible. It's an option. Regarding reasons for quarrels in utilitarian friendships, Aristotle says this can happen between equals and unequals in private and legal matters. Since friendship is essentially rooted in justice, and justice is of two species, personal and legal, friendships can be of two kinds, personal and legal. Complaints in utilitarian friendships are especially prone to arise as a result of confusing orders and kinds of personal and professional friendships. For example, in a business deal, one person wants justice according to law, another wants or expects it according to personal relation. The people involved in business are friends, and they're mixing their personal and professional friendships, or they are confounding all of these friendships within a professional organization. Also, some legal contracts are spelled out in writing, while others are based on a handshake, on a combination of the two. A moral utility exists in such business dealings in which, while not formally expressed in writing, people who give a good, do a favor, especially in business, expect to get something, receive a favor in return. Because to confer a benefit without receiving one is noble, and the utilitarian man wants to appear noble, at times he pretends publicly not to want a profit for doing a good deed, which Aristotle tends to think tends to be against human nature. To show how to avoid quarrels in utilitarian relations, Aristotle advises first, a person should, if possible, avoid becoming involved in utilitarian exchanges without a fixed agreement of the terms of such exchanges. When freely receiving a benefit from another, the recipient should from the start consider the persons who are giving the benefit and why, whether the gift is being freely given or comes with strings attached. Next, should consider under what conditions he is receiving the benefit, whether he is able or not to make a return. Then decide whether or not to receive the benefit. In utilitarian relations, suspected utilitarian relations, when he can, he should make a return worthy of the gifts received, because he should not make someone a friend against his or her will. Recall that utilitarian friendships are friendships based on virtue, are not based on virtue. They should not make, and so this is why we shouldn't require these kinds of obligations. Next, Aristotle says that in determining repayments, a difficulty arises about how to measure the repayment in terms of the benefit conferred or the action given. He answers that it should be measured in utilitarian relations according to benefit, because the benefit was only as much as the receiver received. In virtuous friendships, it should be determined according to the intention of the giver, because in such friendships, the will of the giver has the likeness of a measure. According to Aristotle, quarrels in friendships tend to arise when one party thinks he should have gotten more than he did, and in friendships involving virtuous friends, the more virtuous thinks he should receive more. In utilitarian, the more useful person thinks he should receive more, just as in business relations. The bigger investor expects bigger returns. In both cases, Aristotle says, both parties in general appear to reason rightly, that something more is the right measure. To the needy, greater gain, a monetary gain. To the benefactor, greater honor. Honor is suitable compensation for acts of virtue. Monetary gain provides assistance against need, a good for the needy. Observance and recognition of excellence creates proportionate equality among friends, preserves friendships among people and within states. Friends ask of friends what is possible, not what is equal or impossible. Not often possible is for the same person to get riches and honors. Since not all benefits to God and parents can be repaid, the just or the virtuous act is to repay what we can and not to try to do the impossible. Thank you very much. I hope once again you enjoyed this as much as I did. Aristotle's Moral Psychology and St. Thomas's commentary on it, flushing it out, is absolutely, once again, astounding. Where we're going to resume Aristotle's teaching in Book 9 of his Ethics on the nature of friendship. Having discussed friendship's nature and kinds, Aristotle next in Book 9 considers its properties, starting with its preservation and dissolution, by saying that fair return preserves friendship. Then he explains in a twofold way how to preserve friendship using principles related more or less to distributive justice relations between social equals like a father and a son, or an employer and an employee, by proportionate equality. First, he explains how such distributions cannot happen, such disturbances cannot happen in exchanges related to commutative justice, where a commonly accepted standard like money is used, but they can happen in qualitatively different exchanges dealing with what today we would call intangible goods like affections and services. Lack of right proportionate measure disturbs friendship, he notes. People tend to judge repayment in friendship in two stages. One, as an internal act of love, and secondly, externally, through a display of love. We tend to judge repayment in a way where we complain about people, one person or another, doing too little. Sometimes the complaints arise because the lover wants pleasure, and one lover wants pleasure, and the beloved wants utility, and neither provides what the other anticipates in entering the relationship, what they chiefly want to get out of it. As remedies against disturbances in friendship, Aristotle recommends determining right from the start, right off, in what fair repayment should consist, made by the person who first receives the benefit, because negligence on this person's part is the chief cause of complaint in friendship. This is the person who has to repay. Right estimation, notice the term estimation, cannot be made without first determining received benefits, basically without knowing who we are and what our abilities are. The amount of repayment is properly determined by considering benefit bestowed by the benefactor and benefit received. He gives the example of Protagoras, who told his students to determine what they should pay him and then do so, not something that other sophists tended to do because they didn't actually promote a good for their students and wanted money up front. Payment ought to be made, he says, based upon virtue, because the measure then becomes the prudent man, the person with right estimation, who tends to avoid excess and defect in real goods. Payment for learning, wisdom, he says, can never be made commensurate. In useful friendship, he says, the right measure should be payment. The right measure of payment should be determined in terms of help received. In pleasurable friendship, the right measure should be equality of pleasure given and received. From a legal standpoint, regarding voluntary personal exchanges, legislators tend to use the principle, he doesn't call it this, but we do today, of caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware, because in such exchanges no redress is possible. Both parties tend to think they gave too much and received too little. Having given advice about how to preserve friendship through a proportionate payment, Aristotle raises some doubts related to repayment involving unequals, like a father and a son and so forth, a superior and an inferior. For example, should the inferior chiefly be the one chiefly listened to? Well, which one? The father, for example, or a professional? Is a friend bound to help a friend before helping a virtuous person? Should a person first repay a benefactor before giving a gift to a friend? He replies that in the abstract, no easy way exists to resolve such problems. As a general rule, he recommends, if we cannot simultaneously do both, repay the benefactor first. It's the honorable choice, like repaying a loan, except in extreme emergencies and extreme need. For instance, he gives that of a kidnapping. Sometimes a benefactor should not be repaid also if a person has become evil, for example. He might be thinking of the example of Cephalus in Book 1 of the Republic, where Socrates says to Cephalus, asks him whether goods received from a person who was insane, weapons that is, should be returned when that person is insane. Would that be just? Regarding whom to honor more, this should be done according to this person's due. That's the finish of lesson 2 in this work by St. Thomas, his commentary. I'm going to skip lesson 3, dealing with minor doubts about friendship, because they've already more or less been covered. And but one statement Aristotle makes is very insightful. People, he says, who counterfeit friendship are worse than people who counterfeit money. Having discussed preserving and dissolving of friendships, Aristotle next talks about, he starts to talk about the origin of friendships within an individual by saying, friendly acts we perform toward another appear to originate from this principle within a person. Our attitude toward ourselves, how much we like ourselves. A person who acts benevolently toward others does so because he inclines to act benevolently toward himself. Goodwill, a will in touch with reality, is friendship's origin within the individual. Since benevolent acts are the effects of friendship, Aristotle divides benevolent acts into 3 species. Voluntarily doing good toward another with no expectation of good in return. A friend who wills, he says, inclines immediately to do. The friend wills his friend to exist and to live for his friend's well-being, not for his own benefit and gain, just as good mothers naturally incline to will the existence and life of their children. Friendly acts promote close contacts, shared emotions of love and pleasure, dislikes and pains, and shared ways of thinking. Because people tend to think that people having at least one of these qualities has the essential quality of friendship. We tend to define friendship in relation to them. He has that in relation to benefit, all these qualities belong to the virtuous man. Other people, and to other people as they think they are virtuous, that is analogously. They estimate this by a kind of natural desire. He then explains what he means by how these virtuous qualities exist in non-virtuous people by saying, virtue and good appear by natural desire, inclination, to be standard of human excellence for everyone, for all time. In fact, insofar as he considers himself virtuous, every man naturally inclines to do good to himself, because virtue and the good man appear to be the natural measure of right human action. In any order, genus of reality, as we learned in our course on the One and the Many, the perfect species is the maximum, the measure, because all of the things are judged more or less perfect to the extent that they approach toward or recede from the maximum. Since virtue is man's proper perfection. The virtuous man is the maximum of perfection in the human species. The virtuous, prudent man should be taken as the measure in all moral actions, all human actions. The virtuous man, however, suitably, proportionately has and possesses what is proper to beneficence, doing good, goodwill, and peace and concord, characteristics that Aristotle is going to examine in future lectures fairly soon. He wishes for himself and his friends real and apparent goods because for him these are identical. Moreover, he generates these goods for himself and his friends because the mark of a good man is to work for the achievement of real good. Because virtue makes its possessor and possessor's works good, the virtuous person wants this for himself and his friends, especially for the most perfect part of the human person, the intellectual faculty. Hence, the virtuous person always strives to do what is reasonable, wish for himself and his friends to be prudent. He always wishes for himself and his friends perfection of the absolute good of soul, a life and conservation of the part of the soul in which wisdom resides. Most especially the virtuous man wishes himself to exist so that his identity can be preserved, to exist like God, who remains eternally in his existence. Because we are most like God, incorruptible and unchangeable in our intellect, the virtuous person thinks of his existence chiefly in terms of his intellect, especially wishes himself to exist and to live, and especially to live in accordance with prudence. Aristotle here is extremely pro-life. The vicious person, on the contrary, who wants chiefly to live for the fleeting and perfect pleasures of the body, does not really want to live or to be, but appears to be the principle of what today is called the culture of death. Most fittingly, therefore, St. Thomas says, the virtuous man possesses in himself the qualities of soul proper to the cause of peace, concord, and harmony, wants most of all with pleasure to turn his soul inward, to meditate alone. With pleasure, the virtuous man pleasingly meditates about, delights in, his fond memories of the sweetness of his past triumphs, his moral triumphs, his hopes and anticipations of future success, his present true and useful knowledge. He is at peace with his emotions. He feels keenly all his sorrows and joys as an integrated unit with the whole of his being, with what today we call integrity. Because the virtuous man rightly identifies the real and the apparent good, knows these, feels these with the whole of his being. He does not know and desire one, the intellectual part of the soul, one with the intellectual part of the soul, while simultaneously knowing a different one with the sentient part and desire of the soul, like opposing powers, like members of a crew team rowing in opposite directions. In the virtuous man, these parts harmoniously cooperate, are not at war with each other. In the virtuous human being, the sensitive part of the soul is so much subject to reason's promptings that it readily obeys them or does so with weak resistance. The virtuous man delights in advance, acting according to reason, does not have regrets, is at peace with himself, Aristotle claims. At this point, he talks about how friends should be disposed to act toward other friends. As he acts toward himself, Aristotle says, as another self. Then he talks about how evil men are disposed to treat each other. They cannot understand, he says, friendship the way virtuous people do. Because the more virtuous we are, the more we know ourselves to be virtuous, like ourselves, are pleased with ourselves and our behavior, and because most evil people know they are evil, they can never find total self-satisfaction. They incline increasingly to loathe themselves as they become more wicked, and others as they become increasingly wicked. Bad men, Aristotle says, do not have the qualities suitable for having the works of friendship. goodwill, beneficence, peace, and concord. Because simultaneously they want and delight in pleasures opposing, agreeing with, opposite goods pursued by the sensitive and intellectual parts of the soul. They are constantly at war, constantly get along with themselves or with others. They have incontinent, intemperate souls and reap their fruits. Lacking in goodwill, they tend to commit gruesome crimes for which other people tend to hate them. They tend to hate themselves, find life burdensome, and often, or at times, commit suicide. Lacking the ability to do good to themselves or to others, they tend to have no real friends and cannot converse with themselves, cannot meditate. They don't incline to pursue speculative kinds of knowing. Instead of turning their souls inward to meditate, which they are not inclined to be able to do, they turn their soul outward to communicate with others in evil words and works. They try to forget themselves in such works, because their memories of past deeds and hopes for future ones leave them intellectually and volitionally empty. They remember their past evil deeds, their moral failures. They anticipate more of the same in the future, experience as a result nothing in themselves worth loving, and so tend to hate themselves and are unable to love others in a healthy way. They try to find internal peace through repeated acts of intemperance and incontinence that increasingly divide the parts of the soul that cannot enable them to experience pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow as an integrated whole in a healthy way. One part of the soul draws an evil man in one way, while the other simultaneously draws him in the opposite direction. Both parts being dissatisfied and distressed in the process, rent with conflicting drives and dissatisfactions, like, as I pointed out, rowers on a crew team going in opposite directions. Never being able to achieve intellectual or appetitive satisfaction. Evil men are filled with remorse and regret, are unable to make real friends because they lack the qualities that make a person friend-worthy. In living without self-love and real friends, if living without real friends and self-love is among the greatest of human evils, Aristotle recommends we should strongly avoid evil and make every effort to become virtuous. After discussing the three works of friendship in general, Aristotle starts to do them in detail, starting with goodwill, which he says is an interior liking that a person has. It's not the habit of friendship, it's a principle of that habit, a necessary condition. It resembles friendship because all friends must have goodwill. Since we can experience goodwill toward a stranger, it cannot be identified with goodwill, that is, friendship. And for a similar reason that it need not be reciprocated goodwill, that is, but friendship does. Goodwill resembles, he says, a lazy friendship because it's a necessary condition for friendship, and friendship starts with goodwill. It's its principle. Goodwill is not love because, strictly speaking, love as an emotion, that is, extends the soul with a kind of violence toward an existing object. Goodwill is a simple movement, a more peaceful one of the will toward an object, inasmuch as it requires vehement impulse over the long term that increases with familiarity. Love demands that familiarity develop with goodwill. Goodwill can arise instantaneously. For example, in spectators at an athletic event who recognize courage in an athlete. Goodwill appears to exist in general in souls of people who have, Aristotle says, some moral virtue and a sense of equity, who recognize some good worthy of praise, of excellence, of beauty in another, some sort of intellectually recognizable and delightful good that's useful to some extent, a virtue, not simply pleasure, which is essentially selfish. Goodwill does not develop into friendship, he says, in a soul that has no room for it. Discussing concord after goodwill, he says that concord appears to be an effect of friendship, but not an identity of opinion, because people who do not know each other can have identical opinions without sharing concord. Concord does not consist in a common agreement about speculative topics. It consists in common agreement regarding preferences and likes, unity of appetite about means and ends, about things to be done. He gives the following as an example of concord. Citizens who agree among themselves about working together to effect a project of mutual interest. He adds that concord chiefly concerns practical matters of two kinds, one of major import, and two related to things that can be shared and possessed by a multitude. Something no one can possibly share, if realized as such, cannot be a cause of concord or a concern of concord. Concord does not consist in the fact that both parties wish good for themselves. It consists in people agreeing that they are all getting what they want out of some practical activity, a meeting of wills and minds, kind of unity about what they want. Concord and political friendship appear then, to Aristotle, to be identical. Such concord is found among virtuous people, because only among such people do the minds and wills, appetites remain one. The wills of only these men remain fixed and unchangeable in the idea of the real good. Unlike Europus, that Aristotle gives it as an example in his time, those tides, and modern Europe, as I would say today, and I think Aristotle would agree, as well as pretty much all of the West and the modern world. It's not found among vicious men, because they cannot tend to agree except through force. Aristotle starts his discussion next of beneficence with the paradoxical claim that benefactors appear to love those they benefit more than those they benefit love them. Not so, says Aristotle. The moral psychology of the relationship between the benefactor and beneficiary is more complicated. This situation appears contrary to reason, because it takes the view of the beneficiary, and beneficiaries are people in debt to benefactors, not vice versa, and have a duty to repay them. The benefactor and the beneficiaries tend to resemble, from the standpoint of the beneficiary, lenders and borrowers. To be free of debt, borrowers, however, wish their lenders do not exist, but because they fear losing what is owed them, wish their beneficiary's life, so they can continue to give them thanks. Lenders and benefactors tend to wish them well, wish them more good than they wish to the benefactors. Nonetheless, benefactors are not solicitous about getting return thanks. They wish to be excused from doing so. I'm sorry, beneficiaries are not solicitous about returning and giving thanks, but benefactors don't really care about getting them that much either. The benefactors love their beneficiaries, while beneficiaries love their benefactors very little and tend to be ingrates. While this tends to portray human nature in a bad light, Aristotle says this does appear to be quite human and accurate. Most of us soon forget benefits we have received and want to get more than we give. When considered from the perspective of the benefits received of the beneficiary, this situation appears irrational. But when considered from the perspective of the benefactor, a man of goodwill, it is quite rational, makes sense. the moral psychology of the benefactor is not that of a moneylender who wishes a beneficiary to live for the lender's benefit and profit. Benefactors love their beneficiaries by nature, Aristotle contends, like good mothers are inclined to love their children and poets their poetry, with a real love and affection, even when their recipients are not now useful to them, never promise to be useful in the future, and tend to be ingrates. In a way, benefactors consider those things, those they have helped, to be somewhat like their creations, or somewhat their creations. He adds to his argument that the chief reasons for such loves is that by nature all human beings inclined to cherish and to choose existence and life. To the extent that something exists, it is good and lovable. Human existence consists in living and acting. No life exists without living act. By nature, all human beings desire to perform living human acts. Because the producer actually producing in some way exists in the effect produced, the action of the mover and cause, the formal and efficient cause, is in the moved and in the caused. Hence, because by nature, their own the craftsmen, benefactors, poets, and parents love their own existence. They incline to love their own productions. Recall what St. Thomas said in this compendium of theology about the way creation is divided up in relationship to form, and this inclination that forms generate with respect to likenesses of themselves and effects. This is especially so when the product is in actuality what the cause is in potentiality. Since our first act of existing through the soul causes our second vital acts, that faculties of the soul effect, our human products consist of the soul existing in these acts, causing a likeness of itself in them as a form. The benefactor's good, what satisfies this person completely, consists in the act of bestowing good, whether or not it's appreciated. Without the recipient, he knows he could not be a benefactor, could not improve the quality of his soul the way he does. As a result, the benefactor loves the beneficiary as a term, an end, in which his good is reached and finally rests. Because nothing virtuous exists in the recipient of a good from an other, considered as such, even though this person might be grateful. The recipient, that's incidental. The recipient need not find anything noble in the benefactor. If the recipient sees any good in receiving a good, it inclines to be inasmuch as it's useful to fulfill a need, because this is why it's given. It doesn't tend to see it as a noble good, making the benefactor fulfilling the need less worthy of love than the beneficiary, who considers the need more than what is being given. Aristotle reinforces his argument by claiming that all activity occurs in the past, the present, or the future, and involves memory, present knowledge, or future anticipation and hope. And pleasure relates to knowledge of all three. The pleasure of present activity is more lovable than that of the past that we remember, and the future that we anticipate or hope for. For the benefactor, so long as the beneficiary exists, so too does the pleasure, the honorableness of his activity. For the beneficiary, the utility he receives passes quickly as the memory of the past. Even the memory of the past honorable deeds in all human beings inclines to be not to be as pleasant as the memory of useful goods, or if pleasant, less pleasant than the honorable ones. That's part of our psychology. Nonetheless, we focus attention on the useful. After talking about the preservation and dissolution of friendship, sorry, I got off track. On the contrary, Aristotle says, expecting useful goods tends to be more pleasing than expecting more honorable ones. The reason for this is that only a known, not an unknown good gives pleasure. Except for the person who has it, no one knows an honorable good. The person who possesses honor knows it. If they are in the past honorable goods, they are known to the beneficiary. In the future, they are unknown. Even when past goods have vanished, useful goods are known in the past and in the future, because help from useful goods in the future pleases as a remedy against future needs. A man is more delighted with hope of useful goods than with the memory and hope of honorable ones, even though we recognize by nature that these are better. But we take more pleasure in the memory of having honorable goods, that is, of being honorable, in the past, present, and future. Hence, a benefactor inclines to remember an honorable good, which is his chief focus of attention, while the beneficiary inclines to remember a useful one, because this is our chief focus of attention as beneficiaries. For this reason, the beneficiary is more pleased and lovable to the benefactor than vice versa. He gives the same argument of Cephalus, whether he knowingly or not, in the Republic to Socrates, when Socrates asked Cephalus about his fortune, and Cephalus indicates that the person who creates the fortune tends to love it more than children, who tend to squander it because they create it, and it's difficult to do. Analogous this is analogous to the way a mother by nature, a good mother, inclines to love children more than they love the mother. After talking about the preservation and dissolution of friendship and its effects, Aristotle raises some doubts about self-love as a teaching moment once again, especially about whether a person should love himself or another more, and whether self-love is blameworthy or shameful. Aristotle resolves these problems by arguing that man can be a self-lover in two senses: one blameworthy, selfish, evil, and vicious; one praiseworthy, selfless, good, and virtuous. The benevolent relation that a human being has to himself individually and specifically and generically is the natural basis of all benevolent acts toward others, because it's the synthesis of right reason and right desire, the perfection of human nature toward which all human beings are naturally inclined. The act of self-benevolence generates in an individual a kind of virtuous unity that establishes in a person a proper relation, a prudent activity on the personal level that enables us to practice through acts of virtuous friendship toward other people the kinds of behavior that help to promote concord in civil society, the human species, the animal genus, and the whole of creation. People who cannot rightly love themselves lack the qualities needed to love others. The soul of the self-loving person that is evil is that generated by an evil individual will. These people tend to be lovers of the irrational part of the soul, intemperate and incontinent, possessing a love common to those who are imprudent. Contrary to the vicious self-love of the evil man, Aristotle says the virtuous man's self-love is the noblest and most praiseworthy, does not incline to assign to himself an excess of physical goods, inclines to seek the noblest kinds of goods, those of the intellectual part of the soul that can be shared by everyone, always. A person of this kind always bestows good things on the intellectual part of the soul. By so doing, this person induces all the parts of the soul to follow right reason, to act prudently. The more interior, Aristotle says, and a principle is, in a subject, in virtual quantity of power, I'm using my terms, the more widely and deeply this influences the behavior of all of the parts of the soul. Here, Aristotle is going into enormous metaphysical psychological analysis. The soul, as the life principle of the whole person, the soul and body, is a prime example. By influencing the most internal of principles within a soul, within a person, the soul, like the soul, a first principle influences all of the secondary principles. Hence Aristotle says the person who wishes to be the most perfect in good works must love himself in a high degree. To prove this claim, he proposes three arguments. One, the person who loves the most interior, dominant, strongest principle of intensive quantity or highest quality and greatest good in him, the intellectual faculty and its perfection, especially loves himself by loving the highest and noblest of goods. In its most authoritative, chiefly directing, leading part, the ruler appears to be chiefly the state. The maximum in the genus, in the generic whole called the state, is the highest part, the ruler, the noblest part, abstractly considered. Hence, what rulers of states do, the CEO of corporations do, the whole state is said to do. So what a human being does in his or her most influential, directing, commanding, and noblest principle, its chief commanding principle especially appears to be a human act, the command and control principle. The self-controlled, continent, and prudent man, not the incontinent and prudent man, is therefore the true self-lover, truly loves human beings. As a second argument, Aristotle says our reasoned and prudent actions, those generated by our most interior and perfect influential principle of choice, appear to be human, voluntary, free acts in the highest qualitative and intensive quantum greatness. What we do under the influence of emotions like concupiscence and anger, we do not do as a perfect, harmonious soul. We do not do as complete selves. We do in a partly unmastered, slavish, voluntarily conflicted, weak-willed way, under the influence of external impulse, against our right reason and right desire, our better judgment, with what resembles a kind of violence. In a special way, we are especially what we do in conformity with our intellectual reason. We are especially most intensively in our chief principle, our intellectual soul, because this is the highest perfected part of the human species. Because the intellectual soul is the first principle, generator of all other human faculties, because all others grow out of it like out of a root or a womb, it is our most interior and causally influential principle of life and action. As a third argument, Aristotle says, because the virtuous person loves the highest part of the intellectual soul, this person perfectly preserves and obeys it. This person loves what chiefly preserves a person as an organizational whole, like a good coach. This person is a highest self-lover because he loves chiefly according to right reason and desire, and chiefly seeks what is really good and a higher good for him, in opposition to the shameful self-lover who seeks useful and pleasing goods, apparent goods, lesser goods over real and higher ones. Such a virtuous person is worthy of highest praise, not blame. This person is helpful to himself and to others, either to do exceptionally good acts, his great soul, a model citizen. If all people were like him, a state would be perfect, Aristotle says. Aristotle next claims that the best of social situations results from such a man being a self-lover, because in so doing he helps himself and others, while the worst of situations results from a vicious, imprudent, intemperate man being a self-lover, because he's a fool who inclines to choose fictional over real goods. Far beyond other human beings, the prudent man will do great acts of sacrifice for the sake of other citizens and friends and his country, even at the sacrifice of his own life, disdaining all external lower goods for honorable internal higher ones. He will incline to choose to delight for a short time in brilliant, intense works of virtue, for a long life, to a long life of mediocre acts of virtue or none at all. He prefers the illustrious life of 1 year to an ordinary life of many years, a single notable good deed to many insignificant ones. While those who die for virtue may live fewer years, by dying for a friend in this one act, they do a greater good than the many acts done by lesser human beings. They choose a great good for themselves, and in so doing, demonstrate that they love themselves very much. By loving honorable goods more than external ones, giving money away to friends, and even their life, they acquire a good of higher intensive quantity and quality. In so doing, they manifest a higher moral quality of soul, love themselves more by giving themselves a greater good. Analogously, the same is true regarding the disdain for honors and positions most people cherish for the good of friends. In each case, the virtuous man always does what is really better for himself by assigning to himself more and higher quality goods and virtue. After solving the problem about self-love, Aristotle solves another about whether a happy man needs friends by answering the objection, because they are self-sufficient, happy people appear to need no friends, have all good things. He answers this by saying an essential part of human self-sufficiency consists in having access to all the required enabling means to exercise virtuous activity. This makes having friends an essential part of having the greatest of external goods. A virtuous person needs friends that he can benefit and can help to get the best out of him, and for him to get the best out of them, both in times of plenty and need, and health and sickness, joy and sadness. To have a solitary life is unnatural for a human being. The happy person does not need the kinds of friends the many consider friends, people to be enjoyed and used for personal advantage. In a minor way, the virtuous person needs friends in a pleasant way for relaxation and laughter. But the happy life for the virtuous person is happy as such. The happy man does not need virtuous friends, because the happy life consists in virtuous living and doing, which cannot happen without friends. I'm sorry, the happy man does need these, because the happy life cannot exist